I think this is maybe a lesson in humility for the prison guards and the prison warden.
Yeah.
Obviously, this prison has been thought of as this fortress of security.
In 1962, 3 men vanished from Alcatraz. They made dummy heads, built a raft from raincoats, and disappeared into the night. For decades, everyone thought they drowned. But in 2014, Dutch scientists changed everything. Their water models showed the men could have survived if they left at exactly the right time. Then came a letter claiming to be from one of 3 inmates. Finally, in 2020, facial recognition matched them to a photo from Brazil. This is how the story of most Alcatraz escape ended. Frank Lee Morris was born on September 1st, 1926, in Washington, D.C. But this wasn't the start of a happy life. It was the beginning of a long, lonely path. His parents left him when he was still a child. He didn't get love, guidance, or even a stable home. By the time he was 11, he was officially labeled an orphan. From that moment on, he was passed around like luggage: foster homes, institutions, reform schools. It never stopped. That became his normal. Just rules, punishments, and empty walls. But Frank was different. Despite the chaos around him, he had something rare. He was smart, really smart. His IQ was 133. That placed him in the top 2 to 3% of people. He was nearly a genius. He could understand complex machines just by looking at them. He had sharp memory, perfect for solving problems. And he wasn't just book smart, he was street smart too. He learned skills like shoe repair and mechanical drafting while locked up. But more importantly, he learned how systems worked and how to beat them. At age 13, Frank entered the criminal world. On November 13, 1940, he was convicted of theft and sent to the National Training School for Boys. His sentence? 6 years, 9 months, and 18 days. That was harsh for a teenager, but it set the tone for his life. He got out early, but it didn't last. He violated parole and went right back in. That would happen again and again. Brief freedom, then more time behind bars. By his late teens, things got worse. His crimes got more serious. Between 1945 and 1948, he served his first adult sentence at Louisiana State Penitentiary. He was barely 19. After his release, he didn't slow down. Less than a year later, he was back inside, this time in Florida. He broke into a place and got caught. In 1952, he got a 10-year sentence for narcotics possession and armed robbery. While serving his time there, Morris pulled off something that shocked the prison system. He escaped. It wasn't luck, it was strategy. He studied the routines, learned the patterns, and found the cracks in the system. And then he slipped through them. This escape didn't just buy him freedom, it earned him a title: Escape Artist. He stayed on the run for about a year. But Morris couldn't stay clean. He got caught again, this time during a burglary. That arrest changed everything. The authorities knew they had someone different on their hands, someone who didn't fear rules or walls. They didn't want to take chances anymore. So they sent him to Alcatraz, the most secure prison in America. Meanwhile, John Anglin was born in 1930. His brother Clarence came a year later in 1931. They were raised in Donaldsonville, Georgia, right in the middle of the Great Depression. Life was hard. Their parents had 14 children and worked on farms, picking whatever crops they could find. The family kept moving to survive. But through it all, John and Clarence stayed close. They did everything together. What made them different from their other siblings was how good they were in water. Even as kids, they would swim in Lake Michigan, even when there were chunks of ice floating. They didn't care how cold it was, they just swam. That toughness would matter later. In the 1940s, the family left Georgia and moved to Ruskin, Florida. It was a small farming town near Tampa. They hoped the fields in Florida would give them more steady work. The family still struggled. While other families across America started buying cars and houses after the war, the Anglins stayed poor. They picked tomatoes and tried to get by. That constant pressure, the feeling of being stuck, probably made crime feel like an escape. John and Clarence didn't want to work their whole lives in the fields like their parents. They wanted out, and soon they found their way. Every summer, the Anglins followed the crops. They'd drive from Florida all the way to Michigan. They worked in cherry orchards and fruit farms. The trip was long, over 1,000 miles, but they did it every year. They lived in small camps, sometimes in tents, surrounded by other migrant families. The boys learned how to survive on the road. They figured out how to stay invisible. By the time they were teenagers, they could read highways like maps. They knew which towns to avoid, how to blend in, and where to hide if they had to. This lifestyle didn't just make them good travelers, it made them think like escape artists. They didn't get attached to people or places. That kind of mindset would help them later, when they'd need to disappear without a trace. Their first crime came early. Clarence was just 14 when he broke into a gas station. It wasn't much, but it opened the door. Soon, they started robbing businesses. But they weren't reckless. They only hit places at night. They planned every move. They studied buildings, mapped exits, and avoided people. They knew how police worked and made sure to stay one step ahead. Then everything changed. It was freezing cold on the morning of January 17, 1958. In a quiet town called Columbia, Alabama, 3 brothers walked into the Bank of Colombia. They weren't wearing masks. They didn't try to hide their faces. They just held out their pistols and told the bank clerk, Mr. Williams, to open the vault. These men were John, Clarence, and Alfred Anglin, part of a poor family with 14 kids. They didn't scream, they didn't panic. They just pointed the gun and got what they came for. Inside the vault and cash drawers, they grabbed $19,000 in cash, which would be worth about $174,000 today. They also took some jewelry, but in their rush, they missed another $4,000 sitting right there in the vault. They didn't notice. They ran out fast. Incredibly, this was the first time that bank had ever been robbed. A local historian later said the vault door wasn't even locked, just closed. That's how easy it was. But the freedom didn't last. 5 days later, police caught them in Ohio. The whole thing ended almost as quickly as it started. Today, the old bank building is still there. So is the vault. It's now part of a museum. But the robbery wasn't the end of the story. In fact, it was only the beginning. After their arrest, the Anglin brothers were hit hard by the justice system. They were sent to federal court. Some reports say they got between 15 to 35 years. Others say the number was different. But everyone agrees it was a heavy sentence, especially for a robbery where no one was hurt. The brothers later claimed the guns they used weren't even real, just toys. But the court didn't care. They had robbed banks in other states before, and the judge made sure they'd pay for it this time. All 3 brothers went to prison. John and Clarence were sent to federal facilities. Alfred, their older brother, was sent to Kilby State Prison in Montgomery. He wouldn't make it out alive. On January 11, 1964, Alfred tried to escape. He failed, and he died. No one talks much about him anymore. But that moment stuck with his brothers. John and Clarence weren't the kind of prisoners who just sat and waited. They had always worked hard, traveling from Michigan to Florida, picking crops with their family. Now, trapped in small cells, they focused on one thing: getting out. They started at Florida State Prison, but the guards saw right away that these two were a problem. Not violent, just clever, just dangerous in a different way. They were moved to Leavenworth in Kansas. That didn't stop them. Clarence even tried to escape by hiding inside 2 giant bread boxes. Some think John helped pack him in. It didn't work, but it proved one thing. They weren't giving up. These weren't first-time escape attempts either. Back in the day, they had even run from chain gangs. They hated being caged. Even though they kept trying to escape, they weren't violent or difficult. Their records were mostly clean, except for the escape stuff. So the prison officials faced a new problem. Where do you send guys like this? Guys who are quiet, smart, and always looking for a way out. In 1960, they got their answer: Alcatraz. Alcatraz was supposed to be escape-proof. Surrounded by icy waters and armed guards, no one had ever made it out alive. But Morris didn't believe in impossible. He saw flaws others missed. The prison was old. The concrete around the air vents had started to crack. The guards moved in patterns. Some corners weren't watched all the time. He kept all this in his head, quietly building a map of weaknesses. Then, something happened that changed everything. 2 familiar names showed up: Clarence and John Anglin. He had met them before in Atlanta prison. Now, by chance, they were all back together on the rock. John arrived on October 24, 1960, as AZ-1476. Clarence followed on January 16, 1961, as AZ-1485. And somehow, the prison staff placed them right next to Morris. Morris was in B-138. Clarence was in B-140. John was in B-141. They could talk through the walls. They worked well together, like a machine. Soon, they brought in one more man, Allen West. Now, they were 4. 4 men with nothing to lose and one goal: get out. Frank Morris was the mind behind it all. Even guards later admitted he was the brains. Every night during the prison's music hour, Morris played his accordion loudly. It wasn't for fun. It was to cover the noise of what they were really doing, drilling and chiseling behind their sinks. They were slowly digging out the ventilation ducts, just a few inches each night. It took months. But they made sure no one noticed. They created fake grills out of papier-mâché to cover the holes. Allen West, a 4th inmate, joined them too, but he didn't make it. On the night of the escape, he couldn't get through his hole fast enough. The tools they used were just as shocking. The FBI later found more than 80 homemade tools. They had turned garbage into weapons of freedom. A broken vacuum cleaner motor became an electric drill. They stole metal spoons from the mess hall and sharpened them against walls to make chisels. They even found a way to muffle the sound of the drill. Everything was hidden in a dark corridor above their cells, turned into a secret workshop. They built a periscope from bits of mirrors and tubes to spy on guards. They made fake bolts out of soap to hold things in place. It wasn't just desperate, it was genius. But their most creative move might have been the dummy heads. Those fake heads weren't just quick crafts. They were art. They mixed soap, toothpaste, toilet paper, and concrete dust to mold the faces. Then they added real hair from the prison barbershop. To make them look even more real, they stole paint from the maintenance shop and gave the faces skin color. When the guards did night checks, they saw a sleeping man in each bed. One head even rolled off the bed when a guard tapped it. Still, nobody thought the men were gone. That mistake gave them nearly 8 hours to get away. Then came the raft. They couldn't swim through the freezing San Francisco Bay, so they built a 6 by 14-foot raft using 50 prison raincoats. These were the olive green kind issued to inmates working outside. They got them by asking other inmates to report theirs lost, then pass the extras along. Inspired by an article from Popular Mechanics, they used the sleeves to make the inflatable tubes and the backs for the floor. Everything was stitched by hand and sealed using liquid plastic from the prison shop. They even cooked the seams over hot steam pipes to make sure the raft wouldn't leak. But to blow up the raft, they needed an air pump. That's where Morris's accordion came in again. He took it apart and turned it into an inflation device. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers sat night after night in their cold, cramped cells, slowly digging at the concrete wall under their sinks. The walls were 8 inches thick, but they had a weakness: salt damage from years of damp sea air. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Every night they chipped, piece by piece, grain by grain, and every piece had to be hidden. They collected it all in their pockets and dumped it into hidden holes in the prison yard during recreation. They weren't just scraping, they were drilling. They turned a broken vacuum cleaner into a makeshift drill. Morris used it during music hour, hiding the sound with his accordion. That's how precise they were. They did this for months, 6 full months, starting in December 1961. Morris alone spent more than 400 hours on his wall. All 3 men worked silently, alone, and one slip-up could have ended everything. But chipping a hole was only the beginning. They had to cover it up too, so they built fake vent covers using paper, toothpaste, soap, and even concrete dust. They painted them to match the exact dull gray of the prison walls. Guards couldn't tell the difference. During cell checks, no one suspected a thing. The fakes were that good. And then they took it even further. They used the same trick to make dummy heads for their beds. They stole hair from the barber shop, shaped faces from paper and soap, and even added shadows and skin tones with paint from the prison art room. There was supposed to be a 4th man, Alan West. He worked on his wall just like the others, but he made one fatal mistake. He tried to patch up loose concrete near his vent with cement a few days before the escape. It dried hard. On the night of June 11, 1962, while the others slipped out, West was still in his cell. He chipped and scratched and dug with bleeding hands. 2 hours later, the hole was only 5 inches wide. Not enough, not even close. He gave up, lay down on his cot, and put his fake head on the pillow. His dream of freedom was gone. But in the end, that failure may have saved his life. West told everything to the authorities. He had nothing left to lose. The others weren't waiting. They slipped out through the back of their cells into a dark utility corridor. It was only 3 feet wide and full of pipes, wires, and shadows. They climbed 30 feet in near-total darkness, using pipes like ladders. Somewhere around 9:37 p.m., a loud noise echoed through the prison. It might have been a ventilation cover falling, but no one checked. The plan moved forward. Weeks earlier, they had built a secret workshop above the cell block, hidden behind giant water tanks. That's where they stored everything. Over 50 raincoats they stitched into a raft, paddles carved from wood scraps, and life vests made from extra coat pieces. Even the bolt holding the roof vent was fake, made from soap and painted to blend in. They opened it now, quietly, and climbed onto the roof. From there, they were in plain sight of the guards. But luck, or genius, was on their side. At around 10:15 p.m., they reached the edge. Using an outside pipe, they lowered themselves 50 feet down to the ground. Fog covered the prison yard. A quarter moon gave just enough light to see the 2 12-foot barbed wire fences standing between them and the water. They'd timed everything to perfection. No guards, no lights, just silence. They cut through both fences, climbed over, and made it to the rocky shore. They weren't done yet. Their raft had to be inflated. So they used an old accordion turned into a pump. The air went in. The raft rose. At exactly 10:43 p.m., they launched into the freezing black water. The currents that night were brutal, 6.7 knots, enough to pull an experienced swimmer off course. But they had a destination, Angel Island, 2 miles away. And then they were gone. On the morning of June 12, 1962, something strange happened inside Alcatraz. At exactly 7:15 a.m., a guard named Orrin Meeks was doing his routine check. He passed by cells 138, 139, and 140. Everything looked normal. The inmates were in bed, faces turned away, blankets pulled up. But when he looked closer, something didn't feel right. He reached in and touched one of the heads. It didn't move. It wasn't warm. It wasn't real. It was a fake, made from soap, concrete dust, toilet paper, and toothpaste. And the hair? Real hair, taken from the prison barbershop floor. Frank Morris, Clarence Anglin, and John Anglin were gone. In their place were dummies, painted to look like them. The guards had checked on them all night and never noticed. The heads were that good. The blankets were puffed up to look like bodies. Meeks sounded the alarm. Warden Blackwell locked down the prison. Sirens screamed across the island. For the first time in years, Alcatraz was in full emergency mode. By noon that day, more than 300 men were involved in the manhunt. FBI, United States Marshals, Coast Guard, local police, all swarming the San Francisco Bay. The Coast Guard sent 6 cutters. The Navy sent helicopters. Air Force units joined the search from above. Patrol boats circled the island. It was the biggest search the country had seen. It cost $100,000 every day. That's nearly $1 million per day in today's money. The FBI sent 126 agents. They went door to door on Angel Island and nearby neighborhoods. Roads were blocked. Airports and train stations were being watched. The search ran non-stop for 10 days. Then it kept going. Weeks passed. The agents even traveled to Georgia and Florida. Maybe the men had gone home. Maybe they'd contact family. The FBI waited, but no one came. Then, on June 14th, 62 hours after the escape, a breakthrough. A Coast Guard boat found a paddle. It was about 4 feet long, made of plywood, held together with screws, just 200 yards from Angel Island. That same day, crewmen on a cargo ship found something else floating nearby. A plastic-wrapped wallet. It belonged to Clarence Anglin. Inside were 13 family photos, names, addresses, ID cards, all sealed tight. It looked like it had been placed carefully, so someone would find it. Some agents believed it was a trick to make people think they had drowned. Even the arrangement of the photos seemed strange, like a possible hidden message. And the tide made things even clearer. Experts said the water currents would have carried a raft from the northeast corner of Alcatraz straight toward Angel Island, exactly where the paddle and wallet were found. 1 week later, on June 21st, a man walking along Baker Beach, 3 miles from Alcatraz, spotted torn pieces of raincoat material. They were yellow and blue. FBI tests confirmed it matched the 50-plus raincoats stolen from the prison. The inmates had sewn them into a 6 by 14-foot raft. They used hot steam pipes to seal the seams. But the water had torn it apart. More proof came the next day when a deflated life jacket made from the same raincoat material was found floating just 50 yards from Alcatraz. Marine experts said The cold 54-degree Fahrenheit water and fast 6.7 knot currents would have ripped the raft apart. Survival in those waters, without wetsuits, was almost impossible. Still, the case stayed open. For 17 years, the FBI chased every lead. They looked through 1,500 tips across 14 countries. On July 17, 1962, a ship claimed to have seen a body floating in the ocean, 15 miles from the Golden Gate Bridge. But the sighting wasn't reported until 3 months later. By then, it was too late to recover anything. Some experts said a body couldn't float that long. Others said in cold water, it was possible. And then came the sightings. Over the years, people said they had seen the Anglin brothers. One of the most convincing came in 1975 from a retired FBI agent who claimed he saw Clarence Anglin in Florida. But there was never any proof. And in 1979, the FBI closed the case. They declared the men had died in the bay. On a quiet December day in 2014, 3 Dutch scientists changed everything we thought we knew about one of America's greatest mysteries. Dr. Olivier Hose, Dr. Rolf Hoot, and Fedor Bard weren't detectives or crime buffs. They were hydraulic engineers. But their tool, a powerful system called 3DI, had the precision to simulate water movements across San Francisco Bay with incredible accuracy. Originally built to study floods, 3DI now had a new mission: find out if the Alcatraz escapees from 1962 could have survived. They didn't just run one test. They launched 50 virtual rafts every 30 minutes from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. Each one followed the currents of that night, June 11th to 12th, 1962. The goal was to see which routes could have led to freedom. They presented their results to over 27,000 scientists at a major conference in San Francisco. Within 2 weeks, the research had over 1.5 million online views. The buzz was massive. Dr. Hutt had started the project after watching a Mythbusters episode. But this wasn't TV. This was real science. And what they found was shocking. They discovered that the escape could have worked, but only within a razor-thin window. If the raft had left between 11:30 p.m. and midnight, the tide would have helped them. The water would have pushed them north, toward Horseshoe Bay, but leave before 11 p.m., and the current would have dragged them into the Pacific Ocean. That meant death. Leave after midnight, and they'd get swept deeper into the bay, where police patrols were waiting. The timing had to be perfect. Just 30 minutes could decide if they lived or drowned. The most surprising part? The official theory for decades was that they headed for Angel Island, but the model showed otherwise. It revealed a hidden force, a 300-foot-wide underwater canyon near the Golden Gate. That canyon created a stream of water strong enough to carry a small raft safely across, if the escapees caught it at just the right time. Then, in 2018, another twist. A letter surfaced, written in shaky handwriting, and sent to the San Francisco Police Department in 2013. It claimed to be from John Anglin, one of the 3 men who escaped. Yes, we all made it that night, but barely, it read. The writer said Frank Morris lived until 2005, Clarence Anglin until 2008. And John? He claimed to be 83 years old and dying of cancer. He wanted a deal: 1 year in jail and medical help in exchange for revealing where he was. He claimed he had lived in Seattle, then North Dakota, then California. But the FBI couldn't prove it was really him. They tested the handwriting. They looked for DNA. Nothing was conclusive. Even the Anglin family wasn't sure. One of their nephews said, "I really haven't come to a conclusion." But that wasn't the end. In 2015, the History Channel dropped another bombshell. A blurry photograph, supposedly taken in Brazil in 1975, showed two men standing beside a termite mound. They wore sunglasses. One of them looked just like John, the other just like Clarence. The photo came from Fred Brizzi, a childhood friend of the Anglins. He said he ran into them at a bar in Rio. They were living as farmers. He gave the photo to the family in 1992, but they kept it quiet for years. When they finally showed it, the family believed it was their way of saying, "We're alive, but we can't come home." Not everyone agreed. Some experts said the men's arms in the photo were too short. The Anglin brothers were known for having long arms. Others pointed out that Brizzi was a drug smuggler, not someone you'd want as your star witness. Even his own widow said he was a liar. But in 2020, a new analysis changed everything. An Irish creative firm teamed up with facial recognition experts. They used AI to scan the faces in the Brazil photo. The result? A match. The software said those men were John and Clarence Anglin. And just like that, the most famous prison escape in American history was back in the spotlight. Because what if they really did make it? What if they escaped a prison no one had ever escaped before, using a homemade raft, perfect timing, and just enough luck? What if the FBI got it wrong all along? And what if, somewhere out there, at least for a while, they lived free?